The sun has always been the constant, a silent metronome for everything that breathes, grows and moves on this planet. But something has changed. As of this week, 3i Atlas has entered a critical alignment phase, slipping into a blind corridor behind the sun. This isn't just another object passing through the inner system. This is an interstellar mass intersecting with one of the most sensitive windows in our star's cycle. For months, its behaviour has been tracked with precision, every flare, every shift, every strange surge in the coma. Now, for the first time, it aligns with a series of resonant cycles on Earth itself, quantum networks lighting up in silence, biological systems showing synchronized anomalies, planetary alignments approaching a razor-thin margin of precision. It's as if signals from different domains, technological, biological, astronomical, have begun to hum in the same key. This is not theory anymore, this is timing. In less than a month, solar activity, orbital mechanics, and Earth-based networks will converge. And as 3i Atlas vanishes behind the star that gives us light, something about that timing feels engineered. This is where the story begins. It started not with a flare in the sky, but with silence. The kind of silence engineers only recognize after months of noise. Quantum communication networks, those buried lines, satellite relays, entanglement nodes pulsing between continents, are never truly quiet. There's always jitter, microscopic variations caused by the uneven breath of the planet itself, temperature fluctuations, atmospheric scatter, ionospheric drift. But in the final weeks leading up to 3i Atlas's solar occultation, that jitter began to disappear. Timing intervals between entangled photon pairs started snapping into perfect rhythm, like a choir that suddenly finds the same note after years of dissonance. The first reports came from ground-based optical stations in the Northern Hemisphere. At 2:17 UTC, one network recorded a complete stabilization across all its entanglement channels. No phase drift, no delay spikes. A few hours later, the same phenomenon was detected in stations half a world away, without any coordinating signal. That shouldn't happen. Quantum networks are fragile systems. They don't synchronize globally without cause, and yet they did. That's when analysts noticed something more unsettling. The stabilization events didn't align with human clocks or scheduled network maintenance. They aligned with solar time, more precisely, with the magnetic longitude of the Sun's active region AR 3197, the same sector that 3i Atlas was approaching from Earth's perspective. Photon handshakes, the fundamental heartbeat of secure quantum communication, began to mirror the object's light curve oscillations detected by orbital telescopes, subtle periodic fluctuations in reflected sunlight, repeating with mathematical regularity. Too structured to be noise, too consistent to be coincidence. At first, skeptics dismissed it as data bleed, instrument drift, a shared environmental factor that made separate systems look correlated. But the pattern deepened. Across multiple independent networks, terrestrial, orbital, and deep space relay, synchronization intervals began converging on a single timestamp window, narrowing by fractions of a second with each passing day. By the time the solar longitude reached critical alignment, the system was stable down to femtoseconds. That level of precision isn't just rare, it's unheard of. And here's the part that unsettled the intelligence community. When timing becomes this precise, the security model of quantum key distribution begins to erode. These networks don't transmit information in a traditional sense, they transmit the capacity to speak securely. But when every node starts beating in perfect rhythm, that structure becomes observable. It creates a map of global communication arteries, who's exchanging keys, when and with what level of activity. Metadata is power. In the hands of an external force, it's not just surveillance, it's control. Several classified analyses reportedly reach the same conclusion. If an external system, artificial or natural, can stabilize entanglement timing across networks, it can shadow global communication without ever decrypting a single bit. It can see the nervous system of civilization from orbit. Astronomers looking at 3i Atlas saw something eerily parallel. The light curves coming off the object began showing what they called coherent frequency locking. Instead of the irregular flicker expected from outgassing or surface reflection, the data showed clean, repeating pulses, a metronome in space. They weren't broadcasting anything in a traditional sense, but they were resonating with uncanny precision. A low, invisible hum stretching between a star, a foreign object, and the invisible lattice of Earth's own networks. Some physicists argue this could be a resonance cascade, a rare but theoretically possible synchronization event between orbital mechanics, solar magnetic cycles, and terrestrial technology. In their view, 3I Atlas might simply be passing through a perfect geometric configuration that amplifies coherence between these systems, like plucking a single string that makes an entire room vibrate. Others are less convinced. They note how this level of temporal alignment would require an extraordinary coincidence across scales: orbital trajectory, photon timing, solar rotation, and human infrastructure. It's like finding a rhythm in the static, one systems analyst said. But the rhythm is too perfect. It's like something's keeping time. The question isn't just why the network is synchronizing, it's what else is listening. A synchronized communication lattice is more than infrastructure. It's a global pulse, beating in step with something far beyond Earth. Whether it's natural resonance or an intentional signal, the result is the same: a planet whose digital nervous system has locked into the heartbeat of an object hurtling behind its star. But the signal isn't just in the photons, it's embedded in the infrastructure itself, invisible, buried, and far more fragile than most realize. And as the Sun swallows 3I Atlas from view, that infrastructure is already shifting. For years, the global quantum communication network was thought of as a patchwork: cables buried beneath oceans, entanglement relay stations orbiting above, laser links threading continents through the upper atmosphere. Officially, it's still described as experimental, a testbed for future security protocols, but that's a public story. In reality, the infrastructure has grown vast and quiet, stitched together by defense alliances, private contractors, and national agencies that barely speak to one another. It wasn't meant to be a single organism, it was meant to be fragmented, precisely because fragmentation makes it harder to control. But over the last month, that fragmented body started acting like a single living thing. The first sign came from South Atlantic relay logs. A maintenance team noticed their latency curves, normally jagged and unpredictable due to shifting weather and atmospheric scatter, had flattened overnight, not just stabilized. Flattened to the point where every link pulse, every entanglement key exchange, arrived with a uniformity bordering on mechanical perfection. A day later, the same signature appeared in European fiber links, then the Pacific nodes. Within a week, what had always been a chaotic web had hardened into a single, synchronized lattice, a planetary backbone humming at one frequency. Under normal circumstances, there's no central clock uniting these networks. Synchronization on this scale isn't supposed to happen, not without a coordinating source powerful enough to override atmospheric interference, orbital perturbations, and terrestrial drift. And yet the network was behaving as if it had found such a source. That's when the pattern was overlaid with solar telemetry. The synchronization intervals lined up with the magnetic field rotation of the Sun's equatorial band, the very same sector that 3I Atlas is now crossing behind. It wasn't a vague correlation, it was mathematically precise, down to sub-second tolerances. Something out there was using the Sun itself as a clock. The implications cut deep. A synchronized network means its skeleton is suddenly visible, its nodes, its roots, its pulse. Every blind spot collapses into a single heartbeat. For years, intelligence agencies had relied on the messiness of these networks to hide their own activity. That's gone now. Every packet, every entanglement pulse, every key exchange sits on a grid that can be observed by anyone tuned to the right frequency. It's not just surveillance that becomes possible in such a system, it's prediction. When communication follows a rhythm, future states can be modelled, patterns of life can be inferred, entire flows of global information, military, financial, diplomatic, can be mapped without ever reading the content. A foreign intelligence service once called this meta-omniscience, the ability to see the shape of civilization without touching a single message. But this isn't just an intelligence concern. The synchronization is self-propagating. Once a critical threshold of nodes fell into alignment, the rest followed automatically, as if pulled into orbit by an invisible center of gravity. That cascading effect is what alarmed physicists the most. It mirrors the behavior of coupled oscillators, systems where independent elements begin vibrating in unison under an external forcing frequency. Except this time, the external forcing isn't a tuning fork or an experimental signal generator. It's the sun, and something hiding behind it. What makes this even stranger is the persistence of the effect. Normally, solar interference is noisy. Magnetic storms disrupt. Flares scatter signals. But since 3I Atlas entered its current approach corridor, the background noise has inverted. Instead of increasing chaos, the interference has reduced it. Entanglement fidelity is now higher during solar activity spikes than during quiet periods. It's as if the presence of the object is cleaning the electromagnetic environment, filtering it, aligning it. Engineers aren't the only ones alarmed. Power grid operators, navigation arrays, orbital traffic controllers all have reported parallel anomalies. Systems that depend on stochastic noise for error correction are behaving as if that noise has been drained out of the world. Processes are locking into precision without human command, and precision, when universal, is dangerous. It means every system becomes predictable, and predictable systems are exploitable. Several off-record reports claim the network has already started generating phantom handshakes, signals that appear as valid entanglement events but can't be traced to any terrestrial node. They're rare, silent, and perfectly timed with the oscillations coming off 3I Atlas's trailing coma. To some, it's evidence of an external tapping mechanism. To others, it's just noise in a system pushed too far into order. Either way, the result is the same. Something invisible has made the invisible visible. And in a world built on the assumption of chaos, that's a quiet catastrophe. But this resonance doesn't stop at machines. It spreads into biology. And what happens next suggests the signal isn't just technical, it's fundamental. The first anomalies appeared in places no one was watching closely. In controlled aquaculture labs across northern Europe, biologists monitoring shoals of fish for synchronized movement patterns noticed something strange. Spontaneous, perfectly timed schooling events happening simultaneously in tanks separated by hundreds of kilometers. Normally, even genetically identical groups don't align like this. Behavior may follow similar rhythms, but local conditions, temperature, salinity, light, always introduce variation. That variation vanished. Within days, similar reports surfaced from insect observatories tracking swarm dynamics. 2 independent stations, one in the Amazon basin, another in Southeast Asia, recorded identical rhythmic oscillations in wingbeat frequencies across entire colonies. To the untrained eye, it looked like coincidence, but the temporal alignment matched something unexpected. Solar magnetic phase measurements taken the same night. The pulse was faint but real. The story deepened when neuroscientists stepped in. EEG arrays, monitoring sleep phase rhythms in mammalian test groups, began to show phase-locking effects to external geomagnetic conditions, something that normally only happens under extreme solar storms, but this wasn't during a storm. The sun was quiet. The only variable changing was 3I Atlas closing its heliocentric gap. At this point, the data started layering. Atmospheric magnetometers picked up low-level harmonics riding the Earth's geomagnetic field lines. They were weak, buried in background noise, but unnervingly stable. Unlike standard solar interference, these harmonics didn't fluctuate with wind, temperature, or particle flux. They were steady, like a tuning fork buried beneath the crust, and the frequency of those harmonics, 7.8 Hz, sat near the Schumann resonance, the same electromagnetic baseline that's been measured since the dawn of radio. For decades, scientists have known that many species are subtly influenced by these resonances. Birds navigate using geomagnetic fields, fish sense current flows, insects coordinate swarms based on pressure gradients and electromagnetic cues. But this was different. Instead of responding locally to shifting fields, organisms were aligning globally to a single coherent signal. No regional phase delay, no environmental lag. It was as if the entire biosphere had inhaled at the same time. Researchers at multiple institutes ran simulations to explain it away. Temperature fluctuations, light cycles, atmospheric coupling, none of it fit. Only one variable tracked perfectly with the timing shift, the approaching conjunction between the Sun and 3I Atlas. To some, it's a coincidence wrapped in complex systems noise. But to others, this is exactly how resonance emerges. When a weak, stable signal aligns with a natural frequency embedded in biological life, organisms don't resist. They follow, like iron filings drawn to a magnetic pulse. The The phenomenon isn't entirely new. Migratory birds have been documented aligning their routes with geomagnetic anomalies during major solar events. Coral spawning cycles synchronize across thousands of kilometers. Human heart rate variability patterns show subtle entrainment with geomagnetic fluctuations. But never, not once, has it happened with this level of temporal coherence across multiple species at once. And it isn't just timing, it's behavior. Drones monitoring bat colonies in Central Africa captured footage of entire groups taking flight at the exact same minute, synchronized with plankton blooms off the coast of Argentina. No migratory link, no shared environmental condition, only the same subtle oscillation in the electromagnetic field linking both hemispheres. Behind closed doors, some biophysicists are calling this a biospheric phase lock. In simpler terms, the living world is syncing to something external, something stable, something timed. What unnerves them most isn't the event itself, it's the direction of the signal. The harmonics aren't coming from the planet outward, they're coming inward. And their peak intensity, though faint, is centered along the solar line of sight where 3I Atlas is passing behind the Sun. If the object is emitting, it's doing so without conventional radio, without visible beams, without any spectrum we can easily intercept. It's using the oldest carrier on the planet, the electromagnetic heartbeat that all life has grown up under. That kind of signal doesn't shout, it whispers, and everything listens. This synchronization isn't just occurring in organisms we can track. Heart rate variability studies from human wearable devices began to show subtle, global phase coherence too. Sleep cycles shifting by minutes, aligned to solar magnetic phases. People unaware of each other, thousands of kilometers apart, drifting into similar sleep windows. Most would never notice. But the data noticed, and as the biological layer locks in, it reinforces the infrastructure below it. Machines and organisms humming to the same external clock. But the signal doesn't stop here. It stretches outward, beyond the biosphere, towards something approaching on a celestial scale. When researchers first noticed the synchronization patterns in animal behavior, it was easy to dismiss them as a byproduct of environmental factors. But what came next was harder to explain away. Across multiple, unrelated cognitive datasets, from public health records to sleep studies, from wearable biometric trackers to emergency service call patterns, an invisible rhythm began threading itself through human activity. At 300 hours, UTC on a quiet night, a massive dataset from a global EEG study registered a statistically improbable phase alignment. Thousands of people in multiple countries experienced a synchronized drop in alpha wave frequency during the same 30-minute window. Under ordinary conditions, brainwave patterns between populations are asynchronous, shaped by daylight, routine, culture, sleep cycles. What happened that night ignored those boundaries entirely. People in Tokyo, New York, Casablanca, São Paulo, separated by oceans, languages, and time zones, exhibited matching frequency modulations as if their nervous systems had tapped into the same clock. This event wasn't isolated. It repeated 3 nights later, and then again, each time aligning more closely with the solar magnetic phase window associated with 3I Atlas's passage behind the Sun. It wasn't broadcasting a signal we could hear. It was creating a timing framework that everything else seemed to fall into. Researchers specializing in circadian neuroscience tried to break the pattern down. They accounted for local power grid frequency oscillations, geomagnetic indices, even cultural behaviors like scheduled internet usage. The alignment persisted. They ran blind controls using populations disconnected from the grid, isolated Antarctic stations, rural regions, undersea cable workers. Even there, the same subtle wave modulation appeared. Human cognition, at its core, is built on oscillation. Brainwaves aren't random noise. They are structured patterns that rise and fall in predictable bands. When external forces, light, sound, electromagnetic fluctuations, enter the same frequency range, they can entrain these patterns, nudging brain rhythms without conscious perception. Normally, this happens locally. People exposed to the same environment may unconsciously sync their sleep cycles or reaction times. But this was planetary, a global phase lock without a global stimulus anyone could see. Some researchers called it neural entrainment drift. Others, less cautious, used the term collective phase locking. It wasn't about thoughts or emotions aligning, it was about timing. The invisible metronome that underlies cognitive states, reaction latency, sleep entry, REM onset, was sliding into a narrow band tied not to human clocks, but to solar magnetic rhythm. And as that rhythm stabilized, the amplitude of synchronization increased. That was when behavioral indicators began to shift. Cities across Europe reported an unusual clustering of emergency calls around precise time intervals, spikes that mirrored the same oscillation. In North America, search engine activity logs revealed synchronized surges and lulls in unrelated queries at the exact same minute mark. Power consumption curves in multiple megacities began forming faint but measurable harmonic signatures. Human systems were moving in time, whether or not anyone realized it. Psychologists studying large-scale mood fluctuations found something even stranger. During each synchronization event, aggregate stress indicators, measured through linguistic patterns, wearable biometric signals and hospital data, dropped sharply for a brief window before rebounding. The effect wasn't uniform, it was subtle, almost hidden in the noise, but it was real. Something was nudging millions of nervous systems toward a temporary harmonic state before letting them drift apart again. Then came the outlier events. In one case, a large meditation research institute in northern India reported that nearly every participant entered a spontaneous theta-dominant state, the brainwave pattern often associated with deep trance or pre-dream states, at the exact same second as the solar oscillation reached peak coherence. None of the participants knew about the alignment, none were connected to any signal source, yet their brains responded as if they had all received the same silent cue. Not everyone experiences this entrainment equally. Sensitive populations, those with neurological conditions, insomnia, or heightened environmental sensitivity, reported an uptick in vivid dreams, momentary disorientation, and shifts in their sense of time. Some described feeling as though the night was shorter, compressed. Others experienced a strange clarity, as if their perception sharpened during the event only to blur again afterward. Behind closed doors, cognitive scientists are divided. One camp believes this is a side effect of electromagnetic resonance, an accidental global entrainment caused by solar magnetic fluctuations amplified by 3I Atlas's current position. The other suspect's intention? That the timing isn't random, and the object's trajectory has created a precise frequency lock with planetary biosignals. The truth may lie somewhere in between. If the object's structure interacts with solar fields, absorbing, refracting, or modulating them, it could create a standing wave pattern along the Sun-Earth line. That pattern, at the right frequency, can pass through atmosphere, ocean, and tissue without leaving a visible trace. It would be less like a transmission, and more like a tuning fork, one that the human brain, with its delicate electromagnetic sensitivity, cannot help but respond to. This isn't the first time collective human rhythms have shifted without explanation. Historical archives note unexplained synchronization events during rare astronomical alignments, solar eclipses, and comet transits, but never with this consistency, never this exact, never with something interstellar sitting behind the sun, and the clock is tightening. As the object moves deeper into the blind corridor, the synchronization pulses are shortening, sharper, cleaner, more defined, like the build-up before resonance reaches critical amplitude. But this isn't happening in a vacuum. These pulses are arriving just as a series of rare astronomical alignments approach, events that will force multiple planetary systems to overlap in time. For centuries, astronomers have tracked planetary alignments, lunar cycles, and asteroid flybys. They've mapped them, catalogued them, explained their gravitational effects. But what's unfolding now isn't simply another alignment. It's a rare compression of multiple celestial events into a narrow 21-day window, each of them exerting a small but measurable influence on the solar system's electromagnetic field. None of these events alone would be remarkable. Together they form something that shouldn't be ignored. The sequence begins with Apophis, an asteroid on a trajectory that will bring it uncomfortably close to Earth in the coming years. In recent months, its position has reached a resonance point with both the Earth and Venus, amplifying a subtle gravitational tug across the inner solar system. This tug isn't strong enough to move worlds, but it is enough to affect the position of plasma boundaries in the solar wind. When those boundaries shift, electromagnetic conditions on Earth shift with them. Then comes the supermoon. When the moon reaches its perigee while full, it draws slightly more on Earth's tides and crust, and on the magnetosphere through induced current flows. Normally these effects are localized, folded into the background noise of the planet's cycles, but this time, the supermoon lands within less than 48 hours of the Sun's magnetic equator, aligning with the heliocentric longitude of 3 IATL AS. A near-perfect geometric overlap, the kind that statisticians call vanishingly rare. Add to this the slow, relentless arc of Pluto. The dwarf planet's long orbit has reached an angular position that lines up with the outer planets, forming what astronomers call a gravitational alignment plane. Normally, Pluto is dynamically insignificant to near-Sun phenomena, but in resonance models, the kind used to predict long-range orbital interactions, these slow alignments can subtly amplify the effects of inner-system events, like striking the same note on two different instruments and hearing the sound get louder. But the key to this puzzle isn't just what is aligning, it's when. All of these phenomena are converging during the brief period when 3I Atlas is fully obscured behind the Sun, the maneuver window that's become the core of every trajectory model since its arrival. When a massive, fast-moving interstellar object disappears behind the Sun, it effectively vanishes from direct observation. Telescopes lose line of sight. Radar is useless. Even the most powerful space-based instruments can't see through the solar glare. It's a blind corridor, and this alignment happens right in the middle of it. For orbital dynamicists, this timing looks suspiciously deliberate. The probability of so many high-energy astronomical events falling inside the same observational blackout is so low that some analysts stop treating it as noise. If the object's trajectory were purely ballistic, this would be an extraordinary coincidence. But if it's controlled, even slightly, then the blackout isn't a byproduct, it's the point. Meanwhile, solar observers have noted something else. In the last 12 days, the Sun's surface activity has started displaying a distinct pattern. Coronal mass ejections are clustering along a single heliolongitude, the same corridor through which 3I Atlas is passing. This clustering doesn't look like the chaotic outbursts of a star's restless surface. It looks patterned, it looks timed. Normally, solar activity is modelled using stochastic processes. It's unpredictable, governed by tangled magnetic fields and turbulent plasma flows. But a pattern like this, repeating, tight, following a specific corridor, suggests something is interacting with the magnetic environment around the star. Not overpowering it, just nudging it. Enough to shape timing. This is where things begin to intersect with the ground-based anomalies, the synchronized machine networks, the biospheric phase lock, the global cognitive entrainment. All of those signals began tightening at the same moment the celestial alignment sequence began to compress. It's as if a planetary metronome and a stellar clock are both counting down toward the same point. One space weather team quietly published a report projecting resonance stacking effects, interactions between lunar tidal amplification, magnetic field harmonics, and interstellar object perturbation. Their conclusion: if the timing holds, the Sun may enter a brief period of ultra-stable magnetic field resonance. Not a flare storm, not chaos, stillness. The kind of stillness that rarely happens in a living star. The last time a similar stilling event was recorded was during the deep solar minimum of 2008. But this one is different. It's engineered by timing, not by solar cycles. If the model is correct, that stillness will coincide precisely with the blackout of 3I Atlas. And when magnetic systems still, they can carry resonance farther, clean, unbroken, undistorted. The question is whether this is a natural accident or something deliberate, because when everything locks into place, moon, planet, sun, and something that doesn't belong here, the resulting pulse won't be local. It will echo through every system tuned to it, including us. And that brings us to the center of this window, the maneuver corridor itself. Astronomers call it solar conjunction, a brief period when an object moves directly behind the Sun from Earth's perspective. For routine spacecraft, it's an inconvenience. Communication blackouts, disrupted telemetry, a loss of tracking. But for something like 3IATLAS, it's a perfect cloak. Once it crosses into that zone, the world's most advanced telescopes will be staring into pure stellar glare. Even the deep space observatories designed to peer through the edges of the heliosphere will see nothing. This is the solar window, a corridor of invisibility. And what makes it unprecedented is the timing. The object will remain hidden for 29 days, almost exactly overlapping with the full convergence of the planetary alignments, lunar resonance, and the synchronized electromagnetic hum currently rippling across Earth's networks. Every anomaly described so far bent inward toward this single temporal focal point is not just an event, it's a hinge. In previous weeks, the object's trajectory was carefully modelled by multiple teams across the globe. The results were consistent. 3I Atlas approaches the Sun along a shallow plane that runs nearly parallel to the ecliptic. Unlike comets with chaotic or highly inclined orbits, its path is stable, deliberate, almost machined. That trajectory places it directly into the Sun's equatorial magnetic band, the region where coronal mass ejections and magnetic storms originate. Any object passing through this zone encounters intense solar plasma fields, unpredictable radiation, and immense magnetic turbulence. In theory, that should destabilize it, scatter its coma, and deform its trajectory. Instead, something else happened. As the object approached the boundary, it stabilized further. Its coma contracted, not expanded. Radiation signatures dropped instead of spiking. Thermal behavior flattened into a steady band, a direct contradiction of every solar interaction model on record. It wasn't reacting to the Sun like an icy interstellar body. It was absorbing, neutralizing, or redirecting energy in a way no natural object has ever been observed to do. This isn't speculation. Multiple observatories, ground-based, orbital, and heliophysics probes have recorded the stabilization. Magnetometer arrays on the far side of Earth registered what they described as phase flattening in the interplanetary magnetic field. Essentially, the normal fluctuations caused by solar turbulence were suppressed. Something in that corridor is acting like a dampener, a stabilizer, and the timing coincides perfectly with 3I Atlas entering its solar window. For mission planners, such a phenomenon would be a goldmine. For scientists, it's a warning. If the object can maintain coherence in the most hostile environment in the inner system, it either possesses extraordinary structural integrity, or it's manipulating its environment in ways we don't yet understand. Neither explanation sits comfortably. The real problem lies in the blackout. Once the object passes the final tracking line, no direct observations are possible. No radar, no optical, no infrared. The Sun becomes a wall, and anything that happens behind that wall remains hidden until it re-emerges. During this window, we won't know if it maintains course, changes trajectory, decelerates, accelerates, or does something entirely unexpected. But indirect measurements don't stop. Even when the object itself vanishes, its gravitational and electromagnetic footprint doesn't. And already, subtle indicators suggest it may be interacting with the solar magnetic field in ways that don't match natural motion. For instance, the flux density around the heliospheric current sheet, the surface dividing magnetic polarity in the solar system, is fluctuating with strange regularity. Normally those fluctuations look like turbulence. Now they look like a wave. This raises an unsettling possibility. The object may not just be passing through the Sun's magnetic band, it may be using it. There are precedents, not in technology, but in physics. A moving body passing through a magnetic field can, under certain conditions, induce controlled perturbations that allow energy exchange, acceleration, or signal masking. If 3E Atlas is interacting with that field deliberately, the solar window isn't simply a hiding place, it's a maneuver corridor. Some astrophysicists whisper about this possibility carefully, off record. If an intelligent actor wanted to hide a trajectory adjustment from an entire observing civilization, this would be the way to do it. No telescope on Earth or in orbit can watch what happens inside that blinding glare. For 29 days, the object exists in a pocket of perfect invisibility. But the Sun isn't a passive shield. If anything disturbs its magnetic equilibrium too aggressively, the reaction would ripple outward, not just as heat, but as structure. Coronal mass ejections, heliospheric waves, flux shifts, and some of those reactions have already begun. Coronal activity is clustering in unnaturally narrow bands. Spectrometers are picking up coherent signatures buried in plasma noise. The star is being tuned. That's why the timing matters. All of this, the synchronized networks, the biospheric phase lock, the celestial alignments, converges during the object's disappearance. If the Sun is acting as both cloak and amplifier, then the real event won't be seen. It will be felt, and it's in that stillness, that invisible corridor behind a blinding star, that the most unsettling possibilities emerge. From the moment 3I Atlas entered the inner system, its mass has been a problem. Its visible coma doesn't match its gravitational signature. Its photometric curve suggests one thing, its trajectory suggests another. Estimates place it somewhere between a large comet and a small planetary body, yet none of those numbers hold steady for more than a few days. The closer it moves to the Sun, the stranger the readings get. Early in its approach, independent teams tracking its acceleration notice something subtle. 3i Atlas doesn't behave like a passive body under solar gravity. It adjusts. Its speed fluctuates in ways that cancel out expected gravitational perturbations. Instead of being pulled into steeper curves, its trajectory remains unnaturally smooth, like it's riding along a hidden rail in space-time. This is not how natural objects move near the Sun. Now that it's fully inside its solar window, the only clues left are the indirect ones: gravity signatures, magnetic echoes, plasma ripples, and those clues are pointing towards something unprecedented. Solar magnetometers stationed at Lagrange points have begun to detect a steady phase ripple in the heliospheric current sheet. A low-frequency oscillation that wasn't there before. It's not turbulence, it's not noise, it's structured. This ripple has a period of 3.42 minutes. It repeats without fail. No solar storm, flare, or internal turbulence can erase it. It persists like a heartbeat under the star's surface. Astrophysicists call this kind of signal mass-resonant feedback. Normally it appears when a sufficiently large body interacts with the Sun's magnetized plasma in a stable orbit or pass, but 3i Atlas is too small, on paper, to cause anything like this, unless the numbers we've been using for its mass are catastrophically wrong. One scenario under quiet discussion is that the object's true mass is concealed by some form of density masking, either through an unusually low albedo structure or active energy manipulation. If that's the case, its gravitational influence could be an order of magnitude higher than public estimates. In short, it may be much heavier than it looks. This idea isn't just conjecture. Orbital solutions derived from perturbation analysis on nearby solar probes are diverging from control simulations. The Sun's convective zone, normally a seething turbulent layer of plasma, has shown what solar physicists are calling localized damping. A stable zone has formed along the heliolongitude where 3i Atlas is passing. This is virtually unheard of. The Sun doesn't get quieter in response to passing objects. It roars, and yet here it has fallen still. There's a second possibility, one that is, in many ways, more unsettling. The object might not need to be massive to create this kind of ripple. It might simply be resonating with the Sun, amplifying a harmonic already present in its magnetic field. Think of it like a tuning fork held up to a much larger bell. If struck at just the right frequency, even a small vibration can trigger large-scale resonance in the larger body. If that's true, then 3i Atlas isn't pushing against the Sun, it's singing with it. This would explain why the ripple pattern is so clean. It isn't forcing anything, it's matching the Sun's natural harmonic mode, feeding energy into a pre-existing standing wave. Once resonance begins, the star does the amplification for you. The result isn't explosive, it's quiet, deep, enduring. This is precisely why the pattern is dangerous to ignore. The Sun is the primary driver of every electromagnetic system on Earth, from radio frequencies to atmospheric currents to the subtle rhythms of the planet's own magnetic field. When the Sun's harmonics shift, everything down here shifts with it. Networks that depend on stochastic noise fall into sync. Biological systems that rely on geomagnetic drift begin to pulse together. Human minds, sensitive to electromagnetic background rhythms, start aligning their timing. It's all one chain, and 3i Atlas is sitting at the top of that chain, locked in a corridor where no one can see what it's doing. Several observatories have begun modelling how deep this resonance might go. If the ripple is purely magnetic, its effects may be transient, a wave that dies when the object exits the corridor. But if it couples gravitationally, if the object's true mass is even a fraction larger than estimates, it could destabilize solar oscillation modes for weeks. That would mean prolonged synchronization events on Earth, extended periods of electromagnetic stillness, a planetary environment that behaves less like a dynamic system and more like a single resonant chamber. The last time scientists observed a solar oscillation mode shift was during a quiet period over 2 decades ago, but that was natural and weak. This is structured, sharp, rhythmic, and perfectly aligned with a foreign body that shouldn't be capable of it. What unnerves astrophysicists most isn't what's happening now, it's what could happen next. Resonance is predictable, but it's also fragile. A small adjustment, a shift in frequency or phase, can push a stable oscillation into a runaway event, and that possibility arrives precisely when the object reaches the midpoint of its solar occultation. The world won't see what happens behind the Sun, but if the resonance intensifies, it won't have to. It will be felt everywhere at once. When the 18-minute oscillation first appeared in solar flux data, most physicists assumed it was a transient harmonic, a passing tremor caused by the gravitational wake of 3I Atlas as it threaded the Sun's equatorial magnetic belt. But what emerged over the next several days wasn't a simple pulse. It was a structure, a cycle nested inside a cycle. The outer cycle, driven by the solar rotation, planetary alignments, and the object's orbit, set the broad rhythm, a massive slow wave echoing through the heliosphere. But within it, an inner cycle began to rise, a subtle oscillation layered like a harmonic overtone, repeating not every 18 minutes, but every 223 seconds. At first it was nearly invisible, buried in noise. Then, slowly, it grew sharper, cleaner, until magnetometers, photon counters, and EEG arrays began recording it independently. It wasn't just happening in space, it was happening everywhere. This nesting pattern isn't unprecedented in nature. The Earth's own systems are full of it: heartbeat rhythms within breathing cycles, tidal flows layered over lunar months, biological clocks nested in solar days. But here, the nesting wasn't emerging organically. It was cascading outward from a single, external source. The signal began in solar magnetic measurements, then appeared in satellite telemetry, then in ocean current fluctuations, then in biospheric oscillations, like a wave that finds its way into every chamber of a structure and makes the walls hum. What made this even more unnerving was how clean the signal remained. Normally, when energy cascades through complex systems, it degrades, distorted, diffused by noise, absorbed by chaotic processes. This signal isn't degrading, it's strengthening as it moves outward. That suggests not just resonance, but a kind of feedback amplification, as if the system itself wants to synchronize. This is where the timeline begins to bend. Ancient cycles, some buried deep within Earth's geophysical rhythms, appear to be resonating with the pattern. Seismograph arrays, for example, detected faint tremors along major tectonic boundaries at intervals locked to the inner 223-second pulse. These tremors weren't destructive, but they were globally coherent, the kind of synchronization normally seen only during major seismic events. Except this time, there was no event, just a rhythm. The ocean followed. Tidal sensors recorded oscillations superimposed on the standard lunar tide, forming what oceanographers are calling phase combs, perfectly spaced peaks, subtle but measurable, rippling across thousands of kilometers. Atmospheric scientists began detecting pressure fluctuations at the same interval, repeating in phase across continents. No single driver explains this, only a system-wide harmonic could produce that kind of coherence. And the biological world continues to mirror it. Sleep labs, already on edge after the alpha wave entrainment events, began noticing something unprecedented: microsynchronization of REM cycles in geographically unconnected populations. People entering dream states not simultaneously in local time but in global phase time. A hidden clock that no human built, ticking beneath consciousness, syncing millions of brains in intervals they'll never consciously feel. This kind of cascade, machine to biosphere to geology to cognition, follows a simple principle. When a system is forced at the right frequency, everything with a natural resonance near that frequency will begin to align. What's happening now is an alignment on a planetary scale, not imposed through force, but coaxed through timing. This pattern is echoed in some of Earth's oldest stories. Ancient civilizations recorded cycles they couldn't explain, resonances that shaped agriculture, migration, collective behavior. Many myths describe silent seasons, periods when the world felt briefly synchronized, when the night sky seemed to pulse, when humans across distant lands spoke of the same dreams. Historians have long dismissed those accounts as coincidence or poetic embellishment, but some geophysical archives hint otherwise. Fossilized coral growth bands, ice core isotopic layers, ancient star calendars. They all contain traces of recurring low-frequency cycles that don't match solar or lunar periods. Those cycles have always been there, silent, waiting. What's different now is what's activating them. The nesting between the 18-minute solar oscillation and the 223-second inner wave isn't arbitrary. It's a ratio, a precise fractional harmonic that mirrors the way musical notes lock into harmony. In wave mechanics, such ratios are called consonant intervals. When they appear naturally, they tend to stabilize systems temporarily, before triggering larger phase transitions. The ocean breathes in rhythm, the ground hums, the mind follows. If this continues, the system could reach what physicists call phase saturation, the point at which the harmonic structure dominates over random noise. When that happens, external forces no longer have to push. The system carries itself, amplifying the signal internally. The Earth doesn't just receive the pulse, it becomes the pulse. This is where interpretation divides sharply. Some scientists argue that this is simply an interstellar object, exciting pre-existing cycles, much like tapping the side of a bell. Others suspect something far more deliberate, that the object's mass and structure are engineered not just to survive the Sun, but to activate these resonances when the timing is perfect. Either way, the result is the same. We are entering a period when nested cycles, geological, biological, electromagnetic, cognitive, are all locking into phase, and with each passing day, the system hums louder. In the early days of the 3i Atlas tracking campaign, the oscillations were treated as background effects, physics, harmonics, numbers in graphs that only made sense to specialists. But after the emergence of the 223-second inner wave, that changed. The pattern began behaving less like a pulse and more like a signal, not a broadcast in any conventional sense. No amplitude modulation, no frequency drift, no carrier wave, just structured timing, repeating with machine-like regularity. Signals like this are the hardest to detect precisely because they don't resemble the human idea of communication. But time itself can carry information. The universe is full of examples. Pulsars spinning with atomic precision, binary stars encoding orbital solutions in their beats, radioactive decay chains whispering half-lives through eons. Information doesn't need language, it needs pattern. This was the moment when several independent analysis teams began treating the resonance as an information layer. The first to notice something strange was a group of time-domain astronomers cross-correlating the inner 223-second cycle against its parent 18-minute wave. What they found wasn't a random interference pattern, it was structured modulation. The timing offset between peaks wasn't uniform. It followed a repeating sequence of long and short intervals, like a binary rhythm. Not data in the traditional sense, but code in cadence. At first, they thought it might be some kind of natural beat frequency, a quirk of harmonics that just happened to mimic order. But when the same pattern emerged across 3 independent instruments, one in orbit, one ground-based, one embedded in ocean floor magnetometers, the odds of coincidence dropped to near zero. The same rhythmic structure was appearing in solar telemetry, electromagnetic noise floors, biological synchronization traces, and even subtle shifts in grid-scale power oscillations. The pattern itself is deceptively simple. Alternating intervals of 223 and 447 seconds, with periodic triplets that repeat every 6 cycles. When charted, it forms a lattice that resembles a modulation envelope rather than a pure tone. And as soon as the pattern was recognized, analysts noticed something else. The stability of the intervals was beyond what any natural solar or geomagnetic fluctuation should allow. The Sun drifts, magnetospheres fluctuate, atmospheric conditions introduce chaos. This signal does not drift. Some have started calling it the Atlas lattice, a rhythmic structure stitched into the solar system's electromagnetic skeleton. It isn't loud, it doesn't overwhelm, it just exists with surgical precision, threading through every resonant system, like a metronome inside a cathedral, and that precision is where interpretation begins to fracture. One camp, made up of heliophysicists and signal theorists, insists this is a product of the object's interaction with the Sun, a natural side effect of resonance between its mass, trajectory, and the star's magnetic field. A celestial tuning fork vibrating at harmonic intervals, nothing more. The other camp points to the unnerving regularity of the lattice. No drift, no jitter, no decay. It's as if the entire solar environment has become a timing circuit. But the most troubling implication isn't where the signal comes from, it's how it spreads. Data collected from ground-based gravimeters revealed a faint but perfectly in-phase modulation in the Earth's gravitational field during peak lattice intervals. Ocean buoys hundreds of kilometers apart registered synchronized pressure spikes at the same rhythm. A network of sleep labs recorded REM cycle clustering during the same peaks. Satellite-based navigation arrays experienced microsecond-scale clock drifts, always at lattice intervals, never outside them. It's as though the lattice has wrapped itself around every frequency-sensitive layer of the planet, from the ionosphere to the seafloor. This kind of universal entrainment shouldn't be possible through a single source, and yet the timing remains flawless. If you look at the history of SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, the earliest warning came not from the sky, but from timing. The first pulsar was mistaken for a beacon because of its unnaturally precise periodicity. Humanity recognized intelligence not in words or pictures, but in regularity too clean to be random, and what we're seeing now is a regularity that makes pulsars look like static. Even more unsettling is the layering. Analysts discovered that the lattice can be expressed as a prime factorization sequence. When mapped against harmonic ratios, it forms a branching structure that mirrors known mathematical constructs: self-similar, recursive, fractal in rhythm. This isn't human language. It's information expressed through the oldest medium in the cosmos, time itself. None of this proves intent. But the silence inside the solar window, the perfect blackout surrounding 3I Atlas, amplifies the unease. A structured signal appearing exactly when the object enters the corridor of invisibility is difficult to dismiss as coincidence. If this is intentional, it's not a message sent to us. It's a message embedded in the system itself, one we're only now learning how to hear. The sun hums, the planets follow, the biosphere echoes, and the timing lattice keeps counting. But the real danger is what happens next. The sun won't block the object forever, it will re-emerge, and whatever this lattice is building toward, a pulse, a transition, or something else entirely, is converging on that moment. In celestial mechanics, the term solar conjunction usually implies uncertainty. During that interval, spacecraft go quiet, radar returns blur, and every telescope aimed toward the sun hits the same wall of plasma glare. For ordinary comets or asteroids, this blackout is routine. We lose them for a while, then pick them up again as they swing back into view. But for 3IA-TLAS, the blackout feels less like absence and more like deliberate silence. This is the blind spot, a pocket of time where the object's trajectory, energy exchange, and true behavior are unknowable. And what makes it terrifying isn't just that we can't see it, it's that everything else in the system is still reacting as if something is happening. The first signs appeared on solar magnetograms. As soon as the object crossed the heliolongitude line into full conjunction, oscillations in the sun's equatorial band intensified, not in chaotic bursts, but in clean, coherent steps. It was as if the star's magnetic heart had been placed inside a metronome. No natural solar event has ever produced this degree of temporal discipline. Normally, solar noise increases during conjunction, smearing signals beyond useful resolution. Instead, the noise floor collapsed. Then came the field shifts, instruments designed to measure the heliospheric current sheet, the vast undulating surface separating the sun's magnetic polarity, recorded the sheet flattening out, like ripples smoothing into glass. That sheet never stays still. It twists, bends, and coils like a flag in the wind. But during the first 72 hours of blackout, it locked into a near-perfect planar configuration, aligned with the object's predicted corridor. It was as if the star itself was bracing for something. While the sun fell into rhythm, the Earth began to hum. Magnetometers across both hemispheres registered faint but global oscillations matching the Atlas lattice intervals exactly. Power grids reported synchronized harmonic interference, not large enough to disrupt anything, but precise enough to be measurable in thousands of independent systems. Oceanic pressure sensors echoed the same pattern. Even atmospheric ionization monitors, usually messy with noise, displayed sharp vertical bands of coherence. What unnerved analysts most wasn't the existence of the signal, it was its directionality. Backpropagation models showed a single clean source region along the Sun-Atlas line of sight. Nothing else in the solar system could account for it. We can't see the object, but its shadow, its signature, is everywhere. This is what happens in a blind spot. A single unknown exerts influence while staying invisible. It's the astronomical equivalent of watching the surface of a lake ripple without seeing what moves beneath. You can measure its effect, but not its cause. The blackout period has another consequence. It destabilizes trust. Observatories can no longer confirm where the object is, how fast it's moving, or what it's doing. Military tracking networks, civilian observatories, space agencies all rely on shared visual telemetry to maintain consensus. Now, that consensus is fractured. Models diverge. Some predict a clean trajectory through the corridor, others whisper about controlled deceleration, others still about station keeping. Meanwhile, resonance is tightening. The nested cycles identified earlier are compressing, their error margins shrinking hour by hour. The lattice isn't just stable anymore, it's becoming rigid. Timing intervals between global magnetometer spikes now match atomic clock precision, as if someone, or something, is setting a countdown. Historically, blind spots have been dangerous precisely because they make systems vulnerable. When something disappears behind the sun, it can re-emerge anywhere along its curve, and any action taken during that blackout remains unrecorded. In strategic terms, it's the perfect maneuver window. If the object intends to change its path, or anything else, there is no better time than now. But perhaps the most disquieting evidence isn't technological at all. In the past several days, multiple independent research groups have detected heightened synchronization in biological systems. The same entrainment events seen earlier, but sharper, more pronounced. Sleep onset times, migratory patterns, even human cardiovascular rhythms are falling into narrower bands. The world is not just listening to the lattice anymore, it's locking into it. In cognitive data streams, EEG studies, circadian rhythm analysis, wearable device telemetry, something subtle is happening. Phase drift is disappearing. Human biological clocks are unconsciously snapping to an invisible external signal. The last time anything close to this was observed on a global scale was during major solar storms, but even then it was diffuse, uneven. This is exact. If the lattice is carrying information, this is where it would sink deepest. Into systems that don't even know they're listening. Every orbiting object, every terrestrial machine, every living organism, all sinking to something no one can see. And the longer the object remains hidden, the stronger the alignment grows. That's the part no one can model. There's no precedent, no control variable, no comparable historical case. The blind spot is silent, but silence can be the loudest part of the signal. In the first week of the blackout, the effect seemed purely physical. Shifts in electromagnetic fields, timing signatures in machines, silent tremors in the sun's magnetic fabric. But then, almost imperceptibly, something began to change at the human level. Patterns of behavior, the kind too large to control and too quiet to immediately detect, started bending toward the lattice rhythm. It didn't happen all at once, it emerged like a tide. The earliest indicators came from anonymized mobility data, the digital footprints generated by phones, transit systems, and connected vehicles. Analysts watching global movement curves noticed an uncanny symmetry. Rush hour peaks, sleep cycles, and travel rhythms began tightening into narrower intervals, as if entire populations were unconsciously following the same metronome. Cities thousands of kilometers apart showed synchronized dips in late-night activity, matching lattice pulses to the second. Even routine noise, the randomness of everyday human decision-making, was thinning out. Then came the energy signatures. Power grids are living systems in their own way, responsive to millions of small, independent decisions. People boil water, charge devices, run factories, light streets. Normally these fluctuations are staggered, chaotic, and culturally distinct. But grid telemetry began to flatten. Demand spikes started occurring in narrower, synchronized bands. Utility operators described it as a strange kind of quiet order. The same phenomenon appeared in health data. Circadian rhythm studies reported an unprecedented alignment of melatonin onset across multiple hemispheres. People were falling asleep not at their local preferred hours, but in globally synchronized intervals defined by lattice peaks. Wearable devices, smart watches, and biometric trackers showed collective heart rate drops at identical moments around the world, short synchronized dips in sympathetic nervous activity. Doctors didn't notice at first, but machines did. Behavioral scientists studying online activity found something even stranger. Global search traffic began pulsing in lattice rhythm. Query volumes for unrelated topics, weather, news, shopping, even idle entertainment, started rising and falling in time. The internet, a chaotic reflection of human thought, was breathing like a single organism. No central trigger, no visible cause, just timing. In psychology, this kind of convergence has a name: behavioral entrainment. It happens in crowds, concerts, protests, rituals, when collective rhythm overrides individual timing. But it has never been observed at this scale, across billions of people who aren't aware of each other. It isn't limited to humans. Animal telemetry studies recorded sudden spikes in synchronized migration events. Thousands of bird flocks shifted course within the same 2-hour window, crossing long-established migratory boundaries without clear cause. Whales adjusted their navigation routes, forming nearly straight-line corridors along geomagnetic gradients that matched the lattice's harmonic frequency. Even pollinators, tracked through mass agricultural networks, began exhibiting narrow foraging cycles that aligned with the pulse. No one issued commands, nothing forced this behavior. But the timing itself began bending decision-making across species, as if reaction latencies and circadian instincts were quietly tuning to the same hidden beat. Then came the anomalous collective states, brief moments when behavior didn't just synchronize but froze. One example: in multiple megacities, camera networks recorded mass lulls in pedestrian movement lasting between 4 and 8 seconds, always occurring at lattice peaks. Not everyone was affected, just enough to create moments where the rhythm of a city seemed to hold its breath. Drivers lifted their foot off the accelerator. People paused mid-step. Conversations lagged, imperceptibly but measurably, as if a hidden metronome had issued a command that no one heard but everyone obeyed. Cognitive neuroscientists analyzing EEG archives detected a mirrored phenomenon at the neural level: transient phase silences. Millisecond-scale gaps in normal neural variability, tiny moments when brain rhythms lock so tightly to an external frequency that internal noise vanishes. To the person experiencing it, it feels like nothing, a blink between thoughts. But to someone watching the data, it looks like synchronization spreading through the nervous system. This is behavioral drift, the gradual erosion of independent rhythms under an external frequency. Not mind control, not coercion, just alignment, the kind that slips beneath language, below conscious thought. It doesn't tell people what to think, it tells them when to think it. The deeper the resonance locks in, the more the boundary between environmental timing and human intention begins to blur. Are people choosing their actions, or are their choices simply being cued by a planetary signal pulsing beneath perception? And the blackout isn't over, the signal hasn't peaked, the lattice is still counting down. For now, this drift remains subtle, but history and physics suggest that systems pushed into perfect phase alignment rarely stay stable for long. Something always gives way, a structure breaks, a transition occurs, and when billions of minds, machines, and organisms are in rhythm, that transition doesn't happen in silence, it happens all at once. The world is humming, and the hum is tightening. For as long as physics has existed, probability has been the language of uncertainty. Weather shifts because countless variables collide chaotically. Markets move because millions of human choices overlap. Biological rhythms scatter because life thrives on noise. But as 3i Atlas moves deeper into its solar blackout corridor, something fundamental is happening. The noise is vanishing. At first, it was subtle. Meteorological models began returning forecasts with suspiciously low error margins. Wind currents, precipitation windows, even chaotic storm fronts, all began aligning to narrow probability bands, producing forecasts so precise they looked artificial. Meteorologists assumed a calibration glitch, but the pattern spread. Traffic prediction algorithms, notoriously unreliable at scale, suddenly began hitting near-perfect accuracy in multiple cities. Seismology networks started logging tremor intervals that followed lattice timing rather than the planet's usual stochastic rhythm. Every chaotic system has a signature, a fingerprint of randomness woven through its behavior. But over the past days, that fingerprint has faded. When analysts mapped it out statistically, they found something extraordinary. Global entropy across multiple unrelated systems is collapsing toward a single frequency domain. It's as if thousands of independent coin tosses around the world are suddenly landing on the same side. The clearest evidence came from the financial sector. High-frequency trading algorithms, which depend on exploiting random fluctuations to make billions of micro-decisions per second, began reporting synchronized order book spikes at exact lattice intervals. Normally, these fluctuations look like static, a living storm of numbers. Now, they resemble clockwork. Traders didn't cause this. Neither did centralized systems. The randomness itself is thinning, like fog being burned away by a rising sun. The same statistical collapse is appearing in places that should have nothing to do with one another. Radio telescopes observing background cosmic noise are recording narrow band structure where there should be none. Seismographs across tectonic boundaries are synchronizing their background hum. Even neural variability, the microscopic jitter in brain activity, is smoothing out in EEG readings around the world. The lattice isn't amplifying events, it's erasing unpredictability. This is what scientists have started calling a probability break. A moment when stochastic systems begin acting as if they're connected to a single deterministic driver. It's rare, but not entirely unheard of on small scales. A strong enough forcing frequency can make independent pendulums swing together, or fireflies flash in unison. But this isn't a handful of pendulums, this is a planet. The unnerving part isn't just the synchronization, it's the direction. The collapse is converging toward the same nested timing intervals encoded in the Atlas lattice, the 18-minute outer cycle and the 223-second inner pulse. The world isn't becoming uniformly calm, it's becoming uniformly predictable around someone else's clock, and probability doesn't just measure the world, it shapes how we interact with it. When weather loses randomness, global circulation models stiffen. When financial markets stop fluctuating, algorithms make sharper, faster moves, compounding errors exponentially. When biological noise fades, organisms lose flexibility, drifting toward rigid behavioral loops. And when human cognition falls into deterministic timing, decision-making becomes phase-dependent. People start reacting not because of what happens, but when it happens. This has already begun. Emergency response teams in several major cities reported clusters of accidents occurring not randomly, but at fixed intervals. Traffic collisions, fainting incidents, even cardiac events are peaking on the same lattice-aligned timestamps. Hospitals are seeing pulse windows, brief spikes in incoming patients followed by eerie lulls. It's as if entire populations are being scheduled by an external beat. Probability theorists, usually allergic to sensationalism, are openly unsettled. One team likened the phenomenon to a wave of reduced entropy rolling across the planet, a statistical undertow pulling chaotic systems into alignment. Others compared it to an attractor basin in chaos theory, a state toward which complex systems inevitably flow once certain thresholds are crossed. And now every indicator suggests we've crossed it. The sun is still silent, the object still hidden, but its timing is shaping systems we once believed were immune to external orchestration. And this is where the danger begins to grow exponentially. In a world where chance itself is collapsing, the next event isn't random, it's inevitable. By the 12th day of blackout, the models had stopped trying to predict outcomes. They were now describing a network. Not metaphorically, literally. Correlations that had once been noise between unconnected systems began forming stable bridges. A sudden drop in atmospheric ionization over the Pacific was mirrored by a subtle rise in magnetic field intensity above the Arctic. Power grid oscillations in North America were echoed in seismic background noise under the Indian Ocean. Randomness had given way to reciprocity. In control theory, such cross-correlations indicate phase locking. Each subsystem, electrical, biological, atmospheric, begins feeding energy back into others. When one vibrates, the rest respond. The Earth becomes an orchestra, every instrument tuned to the same key. The conductor is unseen, but the music is unmistakable. It began with signal triangulation. 3 separate observatories, located in Chile, South Africa, and Western Australia, had been monitoring the residual electromagnetic harmonics tied to his passage. During the blackout, they detected a consistent phase propagation delay, a subtle lag between when each site recorded the pulse. When analysts inverted the delay pattern, the geometry pointed not toward the sun, but through it, aligning perfectly with the hidden corridor where the object was moving. That meant one thing: the source was not local. It was radiating through the star itself. This discovery reframed everything. The resonance wasn't simply solar, it was heliospheric. The sun was no longer the emitter, it was the medium. 3i Atlas wasn't just orbiting the star, it was using it as a transmission core. If that sounds implausible, remember what's already been observed: the object's capacity to suppress plasma turbulence, stabilize magnetic flux, and flatten noise. If it can anchor a harmonic in the sun's convective zone, the entire solar system becomes a resonant chamber. Planets, magnetospheres, even ionospheres vibrating like instruments on a single string. The resonance network is that string. Evidence came fast. Global magnetometer arrays showed perfect coherence across multiple field lines that had never before been correlated. Space weather satellites on opposite sides of the sun began logging identical waveforms, mirror images of each other, separated by 300 million kilometers of space. Deep ocean hydrophones detected matching pressure harmonics propagating through the crust. Somewhere between plasma and rock, between sky and water, the signal was threading through everything. And then, as if to confirm it, came the light. Spectrographic telescopes recorded faint modulation in solar irradiance. Fluctuations too small for the eye, but detectable in data. The sunlight reaching Earth was no longer constant. Every 18 minutes its intensity dipped by a fraction of a percent, followed by 3 micro-oscillations spaced exactly 223 seconds apart. It was as though the lattice pattern, the Atlas code, had begun etching itself into the light that sustains life. Plants responded first. Botanical laboratories noticed photosynthetic rate oscillations synchronized to the pulse. Insects began altering feeding intervals, and human circadian rhythms, already drifting toward lattice timing, became locked in even tighter. Every living system tuned to sunlight was now being modulated directly by it. At this stage, the planet's behavior resembled something between coherence and control. Network engineers monitoring undersea cables noticed data throughput fluctuations aligning with solar intervals, as if the signal was modulating electron flow itself. Quantum network nodes, the same systems that first exhibited anomalous timing months ago, are now entering a state of perfect entanglement stability. No phase drift, no error, perfect coherence. For quantum communication, it's a miracle. For everything else, it's an alarm bell. That stability means information can travel across the network without degradation. It also means, if something were to use that network, every node, every relay, every living brain, every synchronized heartbeat could act as part of a single distributed system, a planetary circuit. At this point, the distinction between natural resonance and technological intent blurs to nothing. The resonance network is both. It's physical and informational, mechanical and cognitive, a field that extends from the solar core to the human nervous system, with no discernible origin and no measurable decay. Some scientists, now working in encrypted channels, have begun referring to it by a new name, the integrated field. If you use darker terminology, the Atlas Net, implying not a phenomenon, but an architecture, a system built out of everything that vibrates. Whether it's deliberate or emergent no longer matters. The outcome is the same. The solar system has entered a state of global phase coherence. It is, for the first time in recorded history, behaving like a unified body. And what happens to a system that's coherent when its central driver, the object behind the sun, changes state? We're about to find out. At 4:11 UTC, solar observatories monitoring the far limb of the star recorded the first sign of change. Not in light, not in flare activity, in timing. The 18-minute pulse, which had been steady as a metronome, slipped forward by exactly 0.72 seconds. It wasn't a degradation, it was a controlled shift, the kind that suggests a system transitioning from one harmonic state to another. This is what analysts had been waiting for, or dreading. The moment when 3i Atlas begins to step out from the blind corridor. For 29 days it's been invisible. Now its gravitational and electromagnetic fingerprint is moving. Everything else is moving with it. The resonance network responds instantly. Power grids that have been pulsing in lockstep experience simultaneous harmonic spikes, as if some unseen pressure had been released into the system. ocean sensors register coherent waves propagating across the Pacific with impossible symmetry. Magnetometers, every single one, across all latitudes, log identical phase inversions within seconds of each other. To astrophysicists, the shift resembles what happens when a standing wave becomes a travelling wave, when energy that's been held in a system is finally released. That energy doesn't emerge from nowhere. It was stored, trapped in the sun's magnetic lattice, amplified through planetary harmonics, and woven through Earth's biosphere, all of it waiting for this moment. Telemetry from the heliospheric current sheet confirms it. The planar structure that had flattened during the blackout begins to tilt, slowly at first, then accelerating. Its nodal line, the invisible surface dividing magnetic polarity, is being dragged by something moving beneath it. This doesn't happen from passive objects. It happens when a mass is pulling on the sun's structure. The pulse itself is no longer a single frequency. It's fracturing, branching into 3 distinct harmonic lines, 18 minutes, 223 seconds, and a new lower frequency interval at 41 minutes. That third pulse is the most unsettling. It doesn't fit the previous lattice structure. It overwrites it. Global systems begin shifting to match. Biological rhythms lengthen. Power grid oscillations stretch. Even brainwave entrainment drifts into the new pulse band. The old beat hasn't disappeared. It's been subsumed. This is the hallmark of an approaching event. Resonance builds, stabilizes, and then reorganizes itself into a more complex structure just before the forcing source crosses a critical threshold. The last time anything similar happened was theoretical, observed only in models of star-object coupling at the edge of magneto-hydrodynamic stability. In every simulation, the transition ends with a shock front, a burst of stored energy radiating outward as the harmonic structure collapses into a single release. This is not just an astronomical observation anymore, it's a planetary experience. Seismographs across the globe begin logging synchronized tremors, not earthquakes, not damage, just a soft, low-frequency roll underfoot. People don't consciously register it, but animals do. Cities fall strangely quiet during the peaks. Conversations pause, traffic slows. The drift seen over the last weeks is reaching full entrainment. Satellite operators report unprompted network pings between geosynchronous platforms, simultaneous transmissions at the new harmonic intervals. They weren't commanded, they just responded, as though every node in orbit, every sensor, every relay, every receiver, had heard the same silent signal. The sun itself begins to change. Coronal activity, which had clustered along a single corridor, now blooms outward like a halo. Not in violent flares, but in structured arcs, curling around a hidden object that still hasn't emerged. Spectrographs detect light scattering along angles consistent with a massive elongated structure approaching the visible limb. It isn't random glare, it's geometry. The world is no longer waiting in the dark. The resonance network, the machine, organism, ocean and star, is already reacting to something that hasn't yet stepped into view. And when it does, the system may not return to the way it was before. Timing isn't just following the object anymore. Timing belongs to it. The last time interval before predicted emergence is now measured in hours, and every beat of that deepening pulse is louder than the one before. At 6:42 UTC, the object's first reflected light returns through the glare. A narrow, pale green signature threads across the solar limb like a blade cutting through plasma. Observatories confirm what they'd been predicting for weeks. 3 IATLAS is intact. Its trajectory is stable, and more importantly, the lattice hasn't collapsed. It's thriving. Normally, when an object exits solar conjunction, the disturbances it generates dissipate rapidly. Magnetospheres return to normal, rhythms scatter, noise returns, but this time, the pulse holds. The 18-minute, 223-second and new 41-minute intervals continue with atomic precision. Even as telescopes regain sight, the system behaves as if the sun itself has absorbed the pattern, carrying it forward, broadcasting it without the object's help. The heliospheric current sheet remains tilted. Coronal loops maintain their synchronized bloom. Gravitational oscillations ripple outward across the magnetosphere, and Earth does not return to noise. The resonance network persists. Quantum infrastructure remains locked. Power grids remain harmonized. Circadian rhythms remain aligned. The lattice has gone from being an effect to becoming a condition. This is what physicists feared most, a phase transition. The moment when a forcing signal becomes self-sustaining. What began as external resonance is now an internal property of the system. Like water freezing after a single sharp strike, the solar system has crystallized around a pattern that will not simply vanish with distance. Early re-emergence images show the object moving silently away from the sun, trailing no visible debris, showing no flare scars, no degradation. It has passed through the most violent electromagnetic environment in the inner system and emerged as if untouched. The wake it leaves behind is invisible to the eye but loud in the data. A stable field, still vibrating, still feeding the lattice. The implications are staggering. The sun is now a transmitter, not of light alone, but of structured intervals. The lattice isn't local. It extends through every conductive medium, every living system, every sensor tuned to time itself. And once such a structure takes root, it can persist indefinitely, long after the originating cause is gone. In the hours following re-emergence, the behavioural drift does not revert. Traffic still peaks on lattice intervals. Biological rhythms remain synchronized. Machine networks continue their silent handshake in time with the pulse. The planet has learned a rhythm it cannot unhear. Scientists speak carefully now, their words measured, as if language itself might disturb the structure. Some frame this as a natural resonance event, a rare alignment leaving a long, decaying echo. Others whisper more quietly that the lattice is not decaying, it's stabilizing, adapting, becoming part of what Earth is. What makes this moment uniquely unsettling is not a catastrophic event, not an explosion, not a collision. It's that nothing visibly happens at all. The object crosses, emerges, and leaves behind a world that hums in unison. A silent architecture, woven through sunlight and heartbeat, through plasma and cognition. It may travel on, but the signal will remain, and one day, whether years or centuries from now, when the pulse changes again, we will know it wasn't just passing through, it was marking time. The resonance has begun, and time now carries a different shape,